This video is brought to you by Miniature Market. Thousands of board games, discounted prices, miniaturemarket.com.
Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we're going to be different nations, and we're all going to be doing different things. Some of us might be in the factory creating bombers. They're going to be flying around and dropping bombs on different nations. Some of us are going to be underwater trying to be sneaky and get in there with the submarines in order to attack. Others are just going to be detonating bombs in test sites. Today we're taking a look at Manhattan Project 2, Minutes to Midnight. This is a bona fide sequel to the original Manhattan Project from Minion Games. It's 2 to 5 players. Let me show you how it works. I'll see you on the other side. Minutes to Midnight is played over a certain number of rounds. There's a timer, this thing, that goes around. As people retrieve workers, this is going to work its way up, and as it goes through different spots, it is going to trigger certain types of scoring. The game has 4 different types of scoring, and these are all placed at specific spots on the board, but they're random as to where they are, which one is where, which order. So each game will play out a little bit differently because the order in which things score changes. Also, when you get to the end, you'll score all of these again. So 4 different sort of mini games way to score. Here's a technology track where each player will be able to move up in different tracks, which will give them different abilities to try to, set their goals to go after some of these scorings throughout the game. And this also doubles as a scoreboard that the people will be moving up as well. Now each player gets their own board, and they start with 3 laborer workers like that. And over the course of the game, you're going to be adding buildings that you'll be able to use. You're going to be adding maybe bombers and airspace. You're also going to be managing a third world nation that's on your board that other players can interact with. Everyone starts with money, which are these tokens, and some nuke tokens as well. There's also areas where we'll be playing cards for submarines and things like that, but each player gets their own board. There's also a main board that will be used to take actions throughout the game. It's a worker placement game. So on your turn, you can either place workers down or retrieve your workers. When you're placing them down, you'll be able to place them in spots. You can go to 2 different spots if you like. Some things you have to spend money. Like here, you have to spend 4 money. You can put any worker here, and you'll get a bunch of laborers from the supply that you can add and get more and more workers. There's different spots on the board. We'll go over this later, but typically you are placing workers or retrieving workers. If you're going to place workers, before you do that, you can buy a building. Buildings have costs, 1s in this row, 2s and 3s, and there's only a certain amount of each of these buildings, which are the same in each column, depending on the amount of players, and they're randomly placed out so that they're evenly, but randomly. So like in this case, there's no ABM, which are defense type of missiles in that are $2, but they're only 1 or 3. This one only has 1 here, but it has a bunch in 2. So this is a random way to set up the game, which also gives the game a lot of replayability. And before you place, you can buy one of these buildings for this and place it in your main thing. So if I want to spend 1, maybe I could buy this single and only test site that's worth $1 and place it in my mainland. So you'll be adding those buildings to your mainland, which will give you some more options as the game goes on. Many of the buildings you can build over once they're there. And so basically you're placing workers, and then you can also place some workers on your own buildings as well to activate those. It's over to that main board. There's ways to, obviously, as I showed you, to recruit more laborers from your supply. There's also ways to do education. If I had placed this here, later on when I retrieve, now unlike the original Manhattan Project, you don't get these when you place them. You place them all, and then when you're ready on your turn, instead of placing them, you retrieve them. And when you retrieve them, you can retrieve them in any order, but you retrieve all of them, and then you activate them in any order you want. Like this, anytime you do education, these actually go back to the supply, and this person turns into whatever you've got here. So this is sort of a politician, you have generals, you have spies, and so you're either placing or retrieving and activating spots. Here's how you upgrade to different types of workers. Those workers can be used in different spots to do different things. Now I mentioned this board works as the clock because anytime somebody retrieves, this marker moves up 1 and you actually get an award, either a coin or a nuke. So anytime somebody retrieves their workers, this goes up, and this sort of acts like that timer until it gets to one of the scoring spots. And so on a turn, once someone retrieves, it goes here. At the end of their turn, this type of scoring is going to enact. And in this case, this is bomber scoring. There's a picture of a sort of a bomber plane there. Now, even though those 4 types of scorings work differently, there is a common thread behind all of them. In fact, I showed you this test site earlier, and I showed you that on your turn when you're placing up to 2 different spots for your workers, when you retrieve and you're activating them, you can activate these buildings where the test site allows you to basically detonate up to 7 nukes that you have. Everyone starts at 5, but you'll be getting more over the game. For each nuke you detonate, you put these back into the supply, you get a point for each of those, and then you flip this over because you have now tested that. You cannot build on this anymore. It sort of hogs up one of your spots, but In the beginning of each of the scorings, whoever has detonated the most of those will get points. And each scoring section actually has a thing to walk you through. So 3 points if you've detonated the most of the test sites. And remember, this happens during all the scoring, so that's going to happen like 5 times throughout the game, where whoever has the most detonated sites will get 3. So it's one way to get points throughout the game. And each of the scoring does things differently. For example, every player will get 7 points if there's no enemy bombers in your airspace. Because over the course of the game, people are going to be activating factories to make submarines and bombers, and if they have enough nukes, they're able to make make different levels of bombers, and they can place some, this is from the blue player, onto my board. So this has them there. Now there's certain ways that you can, when you get a factory, you can get some of these squadrons, and this will allow you to sort of kick them off and replace them so you don't have any enemies there. But if enemies get there, you won't get 7 points if there's at least one enemy. So one thing throughout the game you're trying to do is trying to get enemy bombers on other people's airspaces so they don't get those 7 points while keeping yours free, because if so, then you do. Plus each player gets a point for each of the nukes on their own style bomber. So this blue player would get 2 points in addition to stopping me from getting 7 points. Let's say later on in the game we get to the third world nation scoring. Now before we go over the scoring, let's look at my board a little bit later. We've got different buildings: the factory they've made, the research lab, the ICBM silo, intercontinental ballistic missiles, reactors, anti-ballistic missile launchers. These are essentially defensive ones that will shoot down other people's missiles. So you'll be building these buildings, and again, you'll be able to activate a lot of these throughout the game. However, one thing I want to talk about is defense. These are these anti-ballistic missile launchers. I have 2 of these. So I have basically a defense of 2. But on the main board, there's a lot of these different tracks I showed you earlier, and over the course of the game, you'll be taking actions to move yourself up these tracks. And let's say I have 4, so it's the amount of defense you have here times the amount of those ABM launchers you have. I had 2 of them times 4. I have actually a defense of 8. And this is really important because 3 of the 4 major ways to score in this game have to do with your defense exceeding something. Now when scoring this third world, you'll get 4 points if your defense equals or exceeds the amount of nukes on your own board's third world nation, because other players are going to be moving up on this track on your board. Whoever's on top furthest is the leader. So this player is leading here, and they've placed 4 nukes taking actions throughout the game. So if my defense wasn't at least 4 or higher, I would not get this 4 points, but as we just saw, my defense is 8, so I'm good for now. But we go through all the different boards. This player, I lead this board, this player's third world nation, and I put 4 nukes there. If this player did not have 4 defense, they wouldn't be able to get this 4 points. So a lot of it is trying to get your defense up high enough. Also, each player is going to get a point for each nuke in the nation that you control, and they'll get 3 points for each nation that they do control. So it's controlling different players' boards, an interesting concept. And then as players continue to retrieve a lot, it will come up to the submarine scoring in this case. Now over the course of the game, as I activated factories, I'd be getting the ability to get bombers and or subs. You'd spend nukes depending on what size sub you want to be able to build, and depending on your technology level on the board that allows you to build a certain level. And you'll be able to get these cards and be adding them to your hand, but you'll also be adding these decoy cards as well, which sort of allow people to try to get rid of your subs, but they might get rid of a decoy instead. So you'll be having some of these cards in your hand, and you'll be placing them on other players' boards. Now throughout the game, players might have been playing these coastal water sub cards on my board, and I would have been able to possibly take actions to try to shuffle these cards up and then try to remove 2 of them, which some of them might have been the decoys and getting rid of them, but some of them might have been these, so where they go back to that player's hand. But at the end of this round, when this scores, I would take all the cards that are here, I would get rid of decoys, and I would add up however many nukes that are on here. So that's like 3, 6, 9. Now my defense was 8, and because my defense wasn't as good as that, I would not get the 7 points. But if your defense is better than how many sub nukes you have on there, then you would get the 7 points. Plus every player gets 1 point for each of the nukes that they've deployed onto somebody's board. Then these cards go back into those owners' hands, and this gets wiped clean. And then as people retrieve over and over around, you get to the final type of scoring, which is the ICBMs. And you may have placed some nukes on your ICBM silos throughout the game, and then each player is going to get 4 points if their defense exceeds the amount of nukes on any opponent's board. So you're going to be watching what other players are doing. If your defense is better than the most opponent, then you get the 4 points. You also get a point for each of the ICBMs that you have, and you get 7 points if you have the most, and 4 points if you have the second most. And then finally, as people retrieve more and more, it gets to the end, where you actually will score each one of these one more time, along with 1 more of the test site scoring, and then whoever has the most points at the end is the winner. Now again, there's lots of different technologies that you'll be moving up. Anytime you use a research lab, you'll be able to move up one of these technologies, and as you go up in these different levels, you'll get better benefits, better bombers, better subs, more nukes when you go to the reactor, more basically missiles on your ICBMs, and more defense. Now we talked about some of the different workers, like these, the politics people. They can get a lot of money by taxing. They can move discs on different United Nation boards. And they're typically how you place on other players' boards or on your own board to move yourself up once you retrieve from there. So that's what the politics are used for. Now the generals you see here, when you go to a lot of these spaces, they'll let you take a specific amount of military actions when you retrieve them. One for each of the chevrons that you see here, so 1, 2, or 3. And they do, some of them do some other things too, like gathering nukes and such. Those military actions are going to allow you to do things like build subs, deploy and build bombers, sweep here to try to get rid of submarines out of there, and deploy nukes into third world nations. And there's spies that you can create, which allow you to espionage into other players' buildings. So if I hadn't placed workers yet and I had 2 spies, I could place 1 in the factory and I could build something at their technology level. So I could basically be using other people's buildings that are better than my own, and I could go there and just move up on research track. So it's a way of using other people's buildings. There's a lot of moving pieces in this game, but that's sort of the nuts and bolts of how the game works. Whoever has the most points at the end of the final scoring is the winner. Well, let's see what I liked about Manhattan Project 2. First of all, the graphic design. I love the way this looks. It looks nice and clean on the table. There's a lot going on here in this game, and there's a lot of icons, and there's things sort of everywhere, but it's done in a very clean fashion. There's just, you know, the way that the icons work together, the way arrows sort of go to different things. I like the way that they did the different types of workers, where the laborers, you know, the generals, the spies. The graphic design and things look really good and tight in this game. This is a very thematic game for a Euro. You know, you're going to the factory and you're building bombers or submarines, or you're making money, or you're testing test sites and you're, you know, blowing up bombs there and you're flipping those over and you can't build on those sites anymore. You're going to a reactor, you know, to be able to get more nukes, and you're working up these different technology tracks. Everything in this game is very thematic. The game has different types of workers, and I really love this. Much like the original Manhattan Project, where you've got, you know, the laborers, the politicians, and the generals, and they all sort of do different things, and you need them at different times to try to get different things done. And I've always liked that in the original Manhattan Project, and it's good here because they made it fresh. It's not the same old, you know, scientists and engineers and things from before. Now it's the, you know, you've got the different ones, and I like how they kind of kept them different, but yet they changed them. So I really like that about this. I love that there's 4 different types of scoring in this game. I mean, it's almost like you're playing 4 different mini games all in one. Whether you're going after the bomber scoring, or the submarine scoring, you know, or the ICBM scoring, or the third nation, and the way that these work and what you're trying to do, you've got to do something very different to try to score in each of these. And there's a lot of interactions in the scoring with the different players. I love with that you have the variable setup, where each game they're going to be scoring in a different order most likely. And so based upon what's there in the scoring, you know, in ascending order, and given that the tiles that come out each game are in a different order. So some tiles might be very cheap, a lot of them in one game, where some of them might have none, or even maybe just one tile that's cheap and the rest are expensive. It will change what you'll want to do at the beginning of the game, but you have to take that in effect with the differences of the scoring. So every game feels very different in that respect. My favorite thing to do here, just like the first Manhattan Project, was the espionage, which is going into other people's buildings. And it was a little harder to do in the first one. There was a, you know, a spot that was very limited. Well, now you can just kind of go there and use other people's tech levels. So you know what? I've been ignoring factories this whole game, but you know what? Sub scoring's coming up. I want to be able to go build a sub. I'll go to this person's factory. I'll be able to use their level because I'm espionaging their factory. Again, tying into that thematic thing. But I love going off and using other people's buildings. But in this one, there is a way that you can use that counter espionage to sort of stop people from doing that. But I love that aspect. It's one of my favorite things to do, is get a lot of spies and use other people's buildings and technologies. The game, even though it goes through those different 4 scorings, between that and the ending, wow, is it crazy. There is a very climactic ending to this game every time, where you're just trying to figure, okay, I've done well in this, and then maybe this one, this type of scoring. Now, what can I do to really enhance that, to make sure I win both of those at the end of the game? Is there anything else I can actually kind of sneak in and take? And the end of the game is very tense, very climactic, and I love the way it ends. So overall, I very much liked the game. Anything I didn't like? This is very different from the first one, where in the first game, you put a worker out and you take an action. And then when you retrieve, it's just like you just retrieve your workers and your turn's done. So you might have a turn on the first Manhattan Project where you a few people retrieve, and it's your turn before you blink. Where here it's like reversed, where people, when they place actions, their turns go pretty quickly. But then when they're retrieving, it takes a long time because you got to activate them all. So my only downtime down to this is like there's a lot of downtime if a couple of people retrieve before it's your turn, because then they got to figure out, okay, I'm going to retrieve, or which ones am I going to retrieve first. There's a very specific order that you're going to want to do things because some things feed into something else. And there's a lot of thinking involved instead of just retrieving and doing the action. So there is some downtime when people are retrieving, and it does slow the game down. And it's something I prefer the other method better, where placing and then getting an action. But the retrieving thing did some great things where it really made when things score and when you retrieve so important. The timing of things in this game, when you trigger them with your retrieve, is very important. So I do like the way that they sort of flip this on its head, but the natural byproduct is there's more downtime when people are retrieving. It's definitely noticeable, and there's a lot of thinking going on there. The game might be too long for some. The box says 2 hours. In your first play, even after teaching and setting up, I would allow 3 hours for your first game for sure. Even on a 3-player game. I think you could probably get it down to like 2.5 hours if everyone knows what they're doing, but there's just a lot of things going on, a lot of things to think about, and it might be a little bit too long for some. So, is this better or worse than the original Manhattan Project? That's going to be up to you. If you like the original Manhattan Project, but you wished it had a little bit more, you didn't want the race, you wanted it to be a little bit more grandiose, you wanted to be able to have scoring in different areas as opposed to everyone doing the same thing, and you don't mind bigger, beefier, meatier, longer games, then I think you're going to love this one. If the original Manhattan Project was just to the edge of how long you wanted a game, and it was just at the edge of how complex you want a game, this one's probably going to be a little bit too much for you. I actually think this is probably a better game. There's more going on, there's more tracks to victory, there's more ways to score points. But I personally like the original better. I like that race. I like the length is perfect for me. The race I like. Everyone's sort of building up their engine to do the same types of things. I like that better. But this is a fantastic game. If you like the heavier Euros, wow, one to definitely check out. Manhattan Project 2, Minutes to Midnight.
This video was sponsored by Miniature Market's Review Corner. The Review Corner features podcasts, video, and written game reviews by gamers for gamers. Miniature Market, the online gaming superstore. Thousands of board games, discounted prices. Check them out at miniaturemarket.com.